My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to 106.7 Wilmington's Big Talker. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Saturday at 1 p.m. and each Sunday at 5 p.m. we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, Castle Doctrine and Stand Your Ground, the expansion of concealed carry into state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of volunteers from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. Folks, a terrible tragedy has taken place in America. A tragedy perpetrated by just a few of the many thousands of peaceful citizens who had concerns. A tragedy that resulted in the loss of life and the destruction of property. Acts which were clearly in violation of the law and the intention of most people to live peacefully. Acts which caused the government to declare an open rebellion was underway, and which resulted in the deployment of hundreds of troops, and which resulted in the death of 8 citizens and 1 law enforcement officer. Wait, you say those numbers aren't right? There weren't that many deaths? Well, that's because I'm not describing the Trump rally. I'm describing the first battle on April 19th, 1775, at Lexington, an event which, like the storming of the Bastille in France 14 years later, started a revolution, an event which created the republic we now fight to save from not just socialism, but communism. I'm not defending the actions of what probably started with a few perpetual malcontents. Now, I will set aside for a moment whether this was a Reichstag moment, since numerous reports suggest that this might not have been started by Trump supporters, including eyewitness reports and photos of leftist agitators instigating the storming of the Capitol, including one known Black Lives Matter agitator who was cited in previous riots and who reportedly interviewed with the media, and including an interview with Texas Congressman Louis Gohmert by One America News, in which the congressman said he had been advised by Capitol Police before the demonstration that Antifa would be present within the demonstration disguised as Trump supporters. By the way, this despite the fact that Fox News is claiming there is no evidence of Antifa at the demonstration. Anyways, they were doing what anarchists have done for centuries, acting as agents provocateurs, if that happened. But we'll set that aside for now. If indeed it was Trump protesters who fomented the breach, I leave it to you to decide what actions might or might not have been justified. I'm not defending them, but neither am I here to condemn those actions. But in the aftermath of Washington, I am asking you to do 2 things. First, to question the narrative you are being fed, and to ask other people to question it as well. And second, to begin preparing for the battle of your life. Indeed, the biggest battle for our republic since the war between the states. Because as much as I focus on the Second Amendment, which was intended by the framers to be the last layer in a series of checks and balances against the abuse of government, this battle is about far more than guns. It is about whether we remain a constitutional republic or become a people's republic. I just got back from the Stop the Steal rally in Washington late Wednesday night, where not just thousands, but by some reports as many as 3 million Americans congregated to peacefully register their grievances against the theft of our elections by leftists bent on grabbing power. But I'm here to tell you that much of what you are being told about by the ostensibly mainstream media are lies. Lies intended to divide us. Lies intended to demoralize us. And lies intended to defeat us. I didn't make it inside the ellipse to hear the president's speech. Few people did. Most of us, packed for most of a mile to the Washington Monument, listened to Trump's speech via video screens. I saw elderly people, disabled people in wheelchairs, white people, black people, and a great number of Oriental people who campaigned against Communist China. I saw signs supporting Trump and denouncing Biden. I saw signs dedicated to individual liberty. And I saw what Ashley Babbitt, in comments made shortly before her death, described as a sea of red, white, and blue. And, of course, I listened as Donald Trump incited the crowd to riot as he urged them to storm the U.S. Capitol. Except, of course, that's nonsense. He did nothing of the sort, despite what you are being told by the media. In fact, Trump's speech was laid, and it was pretty much his standard stump speech. In fact, it was as he listed the litany of election fraud accounts that you are constantly told by the media are just fiction, and as 1 o'clock approached, when the second event was scheduled for about a mile away at the Capitol, that people just gradually started milling away to make the walk. They weren't angry, at least not any angrier than the rest of us who were being lied to. In truth, as I began walking to the Capitol, the mood among the thousands around me was actually fairly festive. People were chanting "Stop the Steal" and laughing and just generally being normal Americans. Now, admittedly, I didn't make it all the way to the Capitol. After 6 hours on my feet, my aging legs gave out, and I segued to the nearest metro station to catch a train back to my hotel. And while at the metro station, I learned about the incident at the Capitol, or it began to trickle out. But what I saw at this demonstration were not domestic terrorists, as Joe Biden has said we are. They were not agitators. They were not violent. They were merely patriots, concerned for the future of our freedom. But of course, then it all happened. The storming of the Capitol began, and now Nancy Pelosi is calling for impeachment or invoking the 25th Amendment. There are a number of Republican turncoats who are starting to talk like they might vote for impeachment. After a break, we will discuss the fallout and what may happen from here and what we can expect. But first, I am asking you to support Grassroots North Carolina. Under a President Joe Biden, God, I hate those words, a Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and, worst of all, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, we will see attempts to pass a ban on semi-automatic firearms, and magazines holding more than 10 rounds. We will see the attempt to tax and register existing semi-autos as though they were machine guns under the 1934 National Firearms Act, which will require you to register them with the government. We will see universal gun registration under the guise of universal background checks, such as we defeated back in 2013, and we will see far, far more. We need your support in fighting gun control. We plan to take, as I will describe later, a national initiative to activate people around the country and to form coalitions to defend our rights against this onslaught. So please go to grnc.org and contribute. Again, that's grnc.org, grnc.org. We'll take a short break. Right now you're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. After our break, we will return with still more information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker 106.7, wilmingtonbigtalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. Once again, I am asking you to support Grassroots North Carolina. Under President Joe Biden, God help us, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, we will see attempts to pass a ban on semi-automatic firearms and magazines holding more than 10 rounds, taxing and registering existing semi-autos as though they were machine guns under the 1934 National Firearms Act, and universal gun registration under the guise of universal background checks, and much more. We will need your support in fighting gun control. So please go to grnc.org, that's grnc.org, and contribute. Again, that's grnc.org. As we discussed in the last segment, I attended the Trump rally in Washington, and what I saw were not domestic terrorists, as Joe Biden would have us believe, but rather patriots of all races, ages, and walks of life, united in their mission to preserve our republic and individual liberty. But then the riot happened. Whether by Trump supporters or by Antifa acting as agents provocateur, property was destroyed and people died. Now, you are likely demoralized. Maybe you just want to give up. After all, the Democrats won not only the presidency, but both chambers of Congress, giving them complete control over the U.S. government. Or might not say won, I might say stole. And, of course, making a gun control fight inevitable. Even Republicans like Bill Barr and Representative Dan Crenshaw are saying you were misled, even lied to. Calls are out to either impeach Donald Trump or to remove him using the 25th Amendment. Hell, Republican Senator Ben Sasse is making noises like he might vote for impeachment. And now, Fox News is pushing the narrative that Trump is alone and abandoned, and that he lied to us, such that even Fox has now turned on us. Instead of standing up for what you believe in, you're being told that we need to seek reconciliation, that we should lower the political temperature or try to get along with our opponents, to unify in the name of peace, to begin healing. Hell, maybe they'll even create a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to re-educate you. The problem with all of this is that most of the people telling you this are the ones who fomented and then rationalized riots in places like Portland and Seattle and Chicago and New York. People like Kamala Harris, who praised Black Lives Matter rioters and encouraged them to continue. People who refused to prosecute rioters who burned police cars and stores, threw Molotov cocktails, looted, and even murdered. Who pushed for bail reform to allow looters to be released so they can resume looting. As one pundit put it, Democrats were for rioting before they were against it. People who are calling for removal of a president by either invoking the 25th Amendment or by impeachment, a president who merely pursued all legal remedies for an election that roughly half of America believes was stolen, and who most certainly did not call for violence from his supporters. I was there. People who are even now doxing Trump supporters, including a lawyer who lawfully participated in the Washington demonstration, getting him fired from his job. People like ABC News director Rick Klein, who in a tweet called for a cleansing, yes, a cleansing of Trump's 74 million supporters. People like Missouri Representative Cori Bush, who just introduced a resolution to censure and remove from Congress any legislator who had the audacity to challenge the election results. These are the people calling you violent and censuring you for supporting those efforts. These are the people like Joe Biden himself who have the audacity to call you a domestic terrorist. You just can't make this stuff up. This level of disingenuity exceeds even anything George Orwell envisioned in his book 1984. But make no mistake, what you are experiencing is not reconciliation. It is nothing but a naked power grab. When you hear that you should be calm, that you should lower the political temperature, what that really means is sit down and shut up. When your perspective is silenced in the, quote, mainstream media, and particularly in social media, as GRNC has been, when its Facebook account was restricted from conducting political advertising in the Georgia runoff elections, what that means is we control the flow of information and, by association, what people are allowed to say and think. And when you are doxxed, intimidated, threatened with cleansing, or called a domestic terrorist, what that really means is we rule you. Either comply or we will destroy you. I grant that some on our own side are telling you to tone down the rhetoric on both sides, but at this point I fear that may no longer be possible. Because the reality is, we didn't start this. We didn't invent speech codes stipulating even the acceptable ways that we may refer to people of different genders. We didn't create a cancel culture in which even a teenager who says the wrong thing can end up marked for life. We didn't start tearing down statues of people like Abraham Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt. We didn't demand that one's race, not their skills, intelligence, or talent, be the metric for how one earns a living. We didn't start rioting, looting, and burning, effectively normalizing violent protest. We didn't actively censor the information received by American voters. And we didn't engage in thinly veiled election fraud designed to deny people a voice in their own government in the interest of pursuing a leftist political agenda. So what I encourage you to do is to defy the conventional wisdom by shaking off our recent defeats, putting your head down, and rededicating yourself to preserving American liberty. Your job is not to be polite, not to be conciliatory, and not to sit down, shut up, and allow yourself to either be ideologically or literally cleansed. Oh, and please stop calling our opponents liberals or progressives. I can assure you they are neither, and I have long since taken to calling them simply leftists. I don't know how many of you remember the 1990s, and in particular the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, where right-wing extremist Timothy McVeigh, along with Terry Nichols and Michael Fortier, bombed the federal building? I do. And what I remember is that from Bill Clinton down to CNN, I, and people like me, were held responsible for the bombing. It was our inflammatory rhetoric that caused the bombing. Calls were made to remove Rush Limbaugh and other conservative commentators from the radio. That is what you are being subjected to right now. Violence that may or may not have been the result of pro-Trump demonstrators is being exploited to shut you down. And if you allow them to get away with it, they will win. In a moment, we will discuss what we can expect from the Biden administration and what we intend to do to prevent them from passing their agenda. Right now, you are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker. After a short break, we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. In recent weeks, hostility from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, if you don't mind, I'll just call them the ATF, has increased dramatically as it begins to search for new guns to either ban or regulate through the 1934 National Firearms Act, which until recently dealt largely with machine guns, sound suppressors, and short-barreled rifles and shotguns. Acting ATF Director Regina Lombardo has a reputation for being anti-Trump. He didn't appoint her, and if recent actions are any judge, she is living up to that reputation. In fact, she has reportedly been in discussions with the Biden team, presumably with an eye toward becoming the permanent ATF director. Indeed, on November 10th, John Crump wrote in AmmoLand.com and described a leaked conference call saying, and I quote, "Acting Director Regina Lombardo told those in attendance that the anti-gun Biden transition team has reached out to the ATF to get the agency's top priorities, which would be pistol braces and 80% lower receivers." Now, if you're tempted to say that doesn't apply to me, you would be wrong. Just like those evil bump stocks which the ATF reclassified as machine guns a couple of years ago, even though they aren't, if the ATF can reclassify these guns, they can reclassify any guns, neatly circumventing the legislative process. It started weeks ago when the ATF sent a cease and desist order to Q LLC concerning its AR-15 pistol called the Honey Badger, this despite the fact that the ATF has previously signed off on the gun. Although the ATF put the order a hold on the order, it continues to steadfastly refuse to tell gun owners which guns it thinks comply with the law and which don't. Next, the ATF threatened SB Tactical with actions over its braces, claiming the company had not sought approval for each individual model of stabilizing brace, even though the company has demonstrated that it did. This led various congressional representatives, including Senator Ted Cruz and 15 other Republican senators, including those Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, who unfortunately lost their elections, to issue a letter to the ATF demanding clarification, saying, quote, ATF has a responsibility to clearly and distinctly articulate its position in order to inform the public of changing regulations as soon as possible. A know-it-when-you-see-it approach to firearms by the ATF can quickly become a slippery slope for all American gun owners as well as government firearm regulation enforcement. The pistol stabilizing braces in question came onto the scene a number of years ago when Sig Sauer partnered with SB Tactical to create a brace for the forearm to help wounded warriors shoot the relatively heavy AR-15 pistols. The ATF approved them. Very quickly, people realized that the braces could be shouldered, allowing them to better stabilize the gun while not having to go through the burdensome and expensive process to register the gun as a short-barreled rifle or SBR. But then the Obama administration decided that if users shouldered the gun, they had redesigned it and created an unregistered SBR, subjecting users to a 10-year federal felony. And so it was until Trump took over, when in 2017 the ATF allowed that incidental shouldering of a pistol stabilizing brace had not in fact redesigned the gun, creating a burgeoning market for compact AR-15 style firearms that make excellent personal defense weapons. In fact, because they remain handguns, they can legally be carried concealed in North Carolina on one's concealed handgun permit. Most disingenuous has been the ATF refusal to clearly define what is or is not acceptable as a pistol stabilizing brace and what makes the gun an unregistered SBR. Like a totalitarian regime, the ATF has taken an I'll know it when I see it attitude on what is or is not legal, even attempting to prosecute an Ohio man for having a stabilizing brace longer than 13.5 inches, despite the fact that the 13.5-inch maximum length was published nowhere, making it impossible for citizens to know whether they are complying with what the ATF claims is the law, a clear contravention of the Fifth Amendment. I would love to tell you that ATF usurpation of power is restricted solely to AR-15 pistols and pistol stabilizing braces, but its acting director, Regina Lombardo, has more than that in her sights. In early December, the ATF raided the offices of Polymer 80, a large and popular manufacturer of what are termed 80% lowers. These lower receivers and sometimes kits are molded but unfinished when purchased, allowing the buyer to legally, at least for now, drill out and finish it into a gun. You see, back when Congress still respected the Constitution, it realized that it could only regulate firearms that moved in interstate commerce. And so if you build your own gun, it doesn't have to be serialized, doesn't need a Form 4473, and it isn't subject to ATF regulation, provided you make it yourself and only by yourself, and that you do not sell it to anyone else. It must be for your sole use. The result has been an explosion of 80% lowers for AR-15 type rifles and Glock type pistols, with hundreds of thousands having been sold. Of course, the leftist media has branded such firearms ghost guns, claiming it is a loophole in ATF regulations. But as we all know, the loophole they seek to close is not only your ability to own firearms in general, but your individual freedom. At any rate, John Crump, writing in AmmoLand.com, says the Polymer 80 raid centered on its, quote, buy, build, shoot parts kits. Citing leaked internal documents, he says, quote, now they are stating that 80% frames and receivers require case-by-case analysis that is dependent on the facts. No law-abiding company has any idea how ATF will apply the rules until a SWAT team bangs on the door, and that's precisely the way the agency wants it. Do you notice a common thread here? Like pistol stabilizing braces, only the ATF can say for sure whether a gun complies with the law or not. And they will let you know as soon as they cart you off to prison. But here we also see the ATF's motivation. They want customer records to see who might or might not have bought one of these parts kits. Says Crump, quote, "The ATF is interested in customer records, and this seems to be a nationwide crackdown. The agency's intent on acquiring customers' personal records and run criminal background against the list to see if any felons have purchased the 80% frame. The ATF is making a de facto 80% gun registration." Now we have good news and bad news. The ATF had opened a comment period with the intention of regulating AR-15 type pistols, or at least, giving some vague guidelines. The good news is that in a storm of negative comment, not only from our people but also from congressional representatives, the ATF has withdrawn that comment period. The bad news is that the ATF almost certainly withdrew it in anticipation of far more draconian gun control coming from the Biden administration. We will discuss that at length in our next segment, as well as what we need to do to defend against the tsunami of gun control aimed at our shore. But right now, once again, I'm asking you to support Grassroots North Carolina. Under President Joe Biden, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, we will see attempts to pass a ban on semi-automatic firearms and magazines holding more than 10 rounds, taxing and registering existing semi-autos as though they were machine guns under the 1934 National Firearms Act, universal gun registration under the guise of universal background checks, and much more. We need your support in fighting gun control. So please go to grnc.org and contribute. That's grnc.org. Right now you're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker. After a short break, we will return with still more critical information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on Wilmington's Big Talker, 106.7, WilmingtonBigTalker.com. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. Once again, folks, I'm asking you to support Grassroots North Carolina. Under President Joe Biden, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, we will see gun control. We will see attempts to pass a semi-auto ban, a ban on these so-called assault weapons, and magazines holding more than 10 rounds. We will see taxation and registering existing semi-autos as though they were machine guns under the 1934 National Firearms Act. We will see attempts to get you to surrender these firearms in a gun buyback that I'm sure will pay you pennies on the dollar. And we will see attempts to pass universal gun registration under the guise of universal background checks and, of course, far more. We need your help. Please contribute to GRNC, Grassroots North Carolina, by going to grnc.org. That's grnc.org. We need your help. I don't know about you, but I have no intention of sitting here and waiting for the tsunami to sweep away all the progress in gun rights that we've made over the past 25 years. I don't think I have to remind you of the Biden platform on gun control, including banning semi-automatic firearms and standard capacity magazines, regulating semi-autos like machine guns under the 1934 National Firearms Act, meaning not only a $200 tax on each gun and each magazine you own, but federal background checks, including fingerprinting and photographing to keep each of them. Or else you can turn them in a government buyback. Then we have the universal background checks, which we defeated in 2013, which would require every gun transfer, whether sale or gift or inheritance or even loaning someone a firearm or, in some cases, potentially handing them a firearm, to be registered by the FBI under the National Instant Background Check System, or NICS. We'll be looking at red flag gun confiscation laws, which, by the way, circumvent all due process and confiscate your guns from people convicted of nothing. We'll be looking at one gun a month laws, gun rationing, the ability to shut down all gun purchases nationwide simply by shutting down NICS. This they call the Charleston loophole. We'll look at repealing the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, which was passed to protect gun makers from the lawsuits that were intended to drive them out of business, as was the agenda in the late 1990s. We'll see an increase in the number of classes of people prohibited from owning guns, such as Barack Obama did first to veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and then to Social Security recipients who had designated people to manage their finances and report them to NICS as prohibited persons, and far, far more. Consequently, this week, I am announcing our Save the Republic issue campaign. We will be creating a new organization, a correlate to our 501c3, Rights Watch International. This will be a nationally oriented organization using national lists we have acquired to apply pressure to legislators across the country to vote against gun control. We will be renaming our Super PAC, or if you prefer, our Independent Expenditure PAC, from the Judicial Fairness Project to the Rights Watch Action PAC. We will be revamping our social media, including aggressively getting it into alerts to encourage people to start looking for us on MeWe and Parler and Rumble, because we can no longer tolerate the censorship being applied by Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. We will be using the new platforms in parallel with our current leftist counterparts. And by the way, we are out there now on these platforms, so check out Grassroots North Carolina on these platforms. We will continue and expand, something we started doing during our Georgia campaign, by sending parallel alerts to both GRNC and Rights Watch. So please sign up and look for those alerts. You can sign up, no charge. We don't require you to join the organization to receive our legislative alerts. Just go to grnc.org, and I believe it's on the right side of the page. You can sign up for alerts. We don't spam you. We don't give out your information to other people. We just send time-critical legislative alerts. Again, the Rights Watch alerts will be oriented toward national distribution and federal gun legislation. We will begin revamping our gun show effort. Currently, we work gun shows throughout the state. We'll be expanding that effort, as well as returning to efforts we've done in the past via postcard campaigns and petitions. In terms of tactics, we will go after U.S. House and U.S. Senate Democrats who won by thin margins, say less than 3%, around the country, as well as the usual quizzling rhinos. You know what a rhino is, right? Republican in name only, like Ben Sasser I just talked about. We'll be going after those people in an effort to deny Pelosi and Schumer majorities for the gun bans they will be seeking. In the U.S. Senate, we will be paying particular attention to Joe Manchin, coming as he does from the conservative state of West Virginia. In particular, we will be making it personal. Our primary tactic, beyond our usual tactics of email and phone campaigns, will be to place demonstrations and concentrate input at selected district offices where local media, which is arguably less ideologically motivated than national media, will pick it up and carry it. In other words, we'll be going after legislators at their district offices. We can't directly vote against out-of-state congressional members, but if we can begin shutting down their district offices, which provide constituent services, we can hurt them with their own constituents. We actually started this tactic in 2013 when we got Senator Richard Burr to back off on his support for so-called universal background checks. It was highly effective. And finally, we will be reviving the Stop the Ban coalition of state and national organizations, which we created to stop Obama's 2013 universal background check effort. At that point in time, we had roughly 31 state and national organizations, all dedicated to the principle that we would not compromise on the so-called universal background check legislation, and as a result, the NRA backed off the legislation and it went down in flames. Do I think it'll work? I'm certainly not making any promises. At present, the NRA is largely combat ineffective because it is absorbed with internal problems. This could be a perfect storm of hard left Democrats and partially absent national organizations, which could lead to the end of gun rights as we know it. Frankly, I think we'll eat some level of gun control, first and foremost the semi-auto ban, which has been the centerpiece of Biden's so-called gun safety platform, and which has been on Senator Chuck Schumer's wish list since at least 1994. The biggest question is whether he will attempt to enact it via legislation or by executive order, by reinterpreting the National Firearms Act as the ATF did for bump stocks a couple of years ago. You are doubtless suffering from malaise and expecting the next 2 to 4 years to be a horror show. Frankly, you might be right. You're probably feeling inevitability and the temptation to withdraw, to give up, particularly when faced with the drumbeat of propaganda painting us as the bad guys. The good news is that unlike 1993 and 1994, when the left passed the Brady Act and assault weapon ban, and were narrowly stopped from passing the far more draconian Brady II only by the 1994 Republican Revolution we helped foment, we've made inroads that should serve us well. Specifically, the profusion of concealed handgun laws, the explosion of AR-15 type gun ownership, and lots of new gun owners. Moreover, as I told our rally at the General Assembly in 2013, when Obama was trying to pass universal background checks, we have now spent 28 years preparing for just this moment. On the downside, the NRA will have limited impact. On the upside, unlike the 90s, we and other state-level groups are far more organized. Maybe we can't stop them. I certainly can't promise that we can. Regardless, I don't know about you, but I have no intention of going down without a fight. My name is Paul Vallone. You've been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on Wilmington's Big Talker, where each Saturday at 1 p.m. and each Sunday at 5 p.m. we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. Please check out my website, gunspoliticsandfreedom.com. Spell out the and, gunspoliticsandfreedom.com. See you next week.